Hello and welcome back to Clay Pigeon Kart Club on the 10th of April 2022. It's still round 2 of the Blue Challenge. Up next it's the Senior Blues. Also on the line in this race is the Senior Blue O plate, currently held by Dave Watts. You can see him there starting on pole position to set out for the best possible defense of his O plate. In the blue standings so far at the moment, it's Stuart Gray leading the way ahead of Joey Foster, with Anthony Cleal and Mike Bell tied for third. Dave Watts, Ben Joseph and Tom Parker in a three-way tie for fifth, ahead of Sylvain Vessier, with Paul Alexander and Nigel Vickery making up the top 10, with Alex Fortune, David Good, Rich Puddle, Chris Underhill and Phil Shears completing the top 15. They're going to be followed by Kevin O'Neill, with Chris Lord, Ron Schoen, John Hartshorn and Alice Kemp rounding out the top 20. In the blue Masters standings, it's Stuart Gray also leading the way, once again from Joey Foster. Anthony Cleal in third ahead of Ben Joseph, with Paul Alexander and Nigel Vickery even on points. So too Alex Fortune and David Good, and Chris Underhill and Phil Shears as they complete the top 10. Kevin O'Neill 11th ahead of Chris Lord, with Ron Schoen, John Hartshorn and Alex Kemp making up the top 15. In the blue veterans, once again Stuart Gray leads the way from Anthony Cleal, Paul Alexander in third ahead of Nigel Vickery and David Good, Chris Underhill in sixth ahead of Phil Shears, Kevin O'Neill, Chris Lord and Ron Schoen. John Hartshorn, Rob Mortimer, Mark Cook, Adrian Helps and Robin Stoddart-Stone's going to complete the top 15. And in the blue legends class, it's Stuart Gray leading the way ahead of Chris Underhill this time, tied on points with David Good. Kevin O'Neill fourth ahead of Chris Lord, making up the top 5 ahead of John Hartshorn and Ron Schoen. And in the blue top weights, it's Ben Joseph leading the way from Tom Parker, Phil Shears, John Hartshorn and Ron Schoen once again, ahead of Rob Mortimer, Mark Cook, Adrian Helps and Billy Thomas. In the 3 heats so far today, Anthony Cleal took the win in Heat 1 ahead of Dave Watts. Stuart Gray would be third ahead of Joey Foster and Paul Alexander, with David Waldron sixth ahead of Ben Joseph, Steve Groves and Nigel Vickery, with Rob Mortimer rounding out the top 10. In the ahead of Sarita Schoen, Kieran Quirk, David Good, Chris Underhill, Robin Stoddart-Stones and Alex Kemp for the novice in 16th spot. Heat 2 was won by Dave Watts this time ahead of Anthony Cleal, going up 21 positions. Joey Foster went up to third ahead of Kieran Quirk and Mike Bell, Chris Underhill 6th ahead of Chris Lord, Steve Groves, David Waldron and Nigel Vickery making up the top 10. So a lot of moving and shaking in Heat 2. Heat 3 was once again won by Dave Watts, this time ahead of Kieran Quirk, Anthony Cleal making up the top 3 ahead of Joey Foster and Mike Bell, Sarita Schoen in 6th ahead of Sylvain Vessier and Nigel Vickery, with Robin Stoddart-Stone's 9th ahead of David Waldron making up the top 10 once again in his first outing back after his big crash at Mansell Raceway last year. Clearly he is fighting fit and ready to go. And the grid for the final is Dave Watts lined up on pole for the O plate, ahead of number 1 Anthony Cleal just going by us on the left there. Row 2 is made up of Joey Foster and Kieran Quirk, with David Waldron a high-flying 5th ahead of Nigel Vickery, with Steve Groves, Paul Alexander, Rob Mortimer and Mike Bell rounding up the top 10. Sarita Schoen in 11th ahead of Chris Underhill and Robin Stoddart-Stones, with David Good 14th ahead of Chris Lord, Phil Shears, Stuart Gray, the top novice Alex Kemp in 18th ahead of Ben Joseph and Sylvain Vessier, Ron Schoen 21st ahead of Adrian Helps, with Harry Smithson and novice Pete Stadden making his first appearance ahead of Tom Parker, and John Hartshorn not going to be starting due to a flight cancellation. Now Watts leads us round top bend. Keep an eye now on Dave Watts and the lights. We're in the starter's orders and away we go, and a good start from Watts. Cleal's gone with him, so too is Foster and Quirk as the field thunders down in towards Billy's blind. Watts gets his nose out in front ahead of Cleal, but Foster's looking all over the back of him as they go through the chicane. There's David Waldron in the yellow and a lot of clustering in the midfield. Now we jump on board with Ben Joseph. Number 8 ahead of us is Phil Shears, and Joseph and Shears both going around the outside of Chris Lord on the way down to the hand hairpin for the first time, and both the comp carts have made that stick. And that's Sarita Schoen going up the inside of Mike Bell as well as they fly through buttons. Chris Underhill looking as well on the outside. There's Pete Stadden and Tom Parker battling away at the back, but to finish the first lap, it's Watts leading from Cleal, Foster and Quirk as the field streams down now towards Billy's blind for the second time of asking. 11 minutes plus a lap on the cards here this afternoon for the Formula Blues, and it's action already from the start as now we jump on board with Steve Groves. Number 17 ahead of us is David Waldron, that's Nigel Vickery going around his outside in the hand hairpin. Good move there from Vickery. And they're battling over 5th spot as Kieran Quirk starts to scamper away up the road. Sylvain Vessier there attacking Phil Shears likewise, but the top 3 starting to check out is Watts, Cleal and Foster. Then a gap to Quirk, then a gap back to Vickery, Waldron, Groves and the rest. And that's Mike Bell now side by side with Sarita Schoen across the line. Bell down to the inside to Billy's blind. He's made the move stick, so Bell up a spot. Now we're on board with Ben Joseph. That's Robin Stoddart Stones on the left, and Joseph goes through. But Ben Joseph already making a move here. He came from 19th on the grid. Have to see how far up the Welshman can get. So now we jump on board with Rob Mortimer. That's Paul Alexander in front of us now, challenging Steve Groves through the horseshoe and up round buttons. It's Groves, Alexander, Bell and Schoen, 5 in a line. Now down across the line we go once more. Bell looks out from behind Rob Mortimer, and they're going to go side by side down towards Billy's blind. Bell makes the pass, that's up to 9th. Ben Joseph there making the pass on Chris Underhill further back, and now Sarita Schoen trying to line up Rob Mortimer as they go through the chicane. Phil Shears and Robin Stoddart Stones in tight behind, as now we're back on board with Alexander. He's going to try and get the exit against Steve Groves. He's going to send it up the inside into the horseshoe. Alexander makes the move, and Bell's going to try and follow him through. They're going to go side by side, Bell and Groves. Bell hanging on around the outside of buttons. Now round pit bend. Bell makes the move around the outside, so Bell up ahead of Groves. Now he's chasing off after Alexander. That's Ben Joseph now challenging on the shoulder of Sarita Schoen. And Joseph in the comp cart down the inside. In behind there, that's Sylvain Vessier and Chris Underhill battling away. Underhill's going to hold the position into the chicane, but now back on board with Joseph. He's going to make the move on Mortimer now, so Ben Joseph scything through the field. His next target is Steve Groves. Mike Bell and Paul Alexander starting to get away. Further in the back there, that's Ron Schoen and David Good battling away, but for the lead it's Watts from Cleal. Joey Foster started to fall back into the clutches of Kieran Quirk. Then it's Vickery, Waldron, Bell and Alexander battling. Back on board with Joseph. He's going to make the move to the inside of Steve Groves. And ahead of us, Bell and Alexander going side by side into the chicane. So Bell through on Alexander, Joseph through on Groves, and now it's Mortimer, Schoen and Vessier in a line. And that's Ben Joseph. He's wasting no time against Paul Alexander. Alexander's going to look back though at the horseshoe. Contact there. Joseph's going to slide wide, but he's going to take the place ahead of Alexander. Then it's Groves, Mortimer, Schoen and Vessier. Underhill and Stoddart Stones battling away there as well, but now we jump on board with the race leader Dave Watts. Anthony Cleal tucked up right behind us as we go through the chicane. There's Vickery, Waldron, Bell, Joseph and co. The midfield streams through Billy's blind and now into the chicane. Looks like Vessier and Schoen both having a look at Rob Mortimer. Vessier to the inside of Schoen though. He's going to dive deep under brake and he's going to hit Mortimer. Mortimer's going to slide wide but hold the position. Vessier going to get ahead of Sarita Schoen. Now can Schoen have an answer back? Robin Stoddart Stones in behind already attacking Chris Underhill, so it's action aplenty throughout this midfield. Now there's Bell onto the shoulder of David Waldron battling for 6th. Ben Joseph's closing the gap as well. It's going to be 3 for 6th momentarily. And then there's a big queue. It looks like Sylvain Vessier might have gotten past Rob Mortimer there, so it's 10th or 11th back. Bell now sliding up the inside of Waldron, but Waldron's going to switch back underneath and regain the place. Now we're on board with Joseph as we go through the horseshoe. Looking all over the back of Bell. Bell likewise to Waldron. They go up towards Top Bend. There's Chris Lord and Alex Kent. Now back on board with Joseph as they thunders past Pete Stadden, who's struggling with something. Now down into Billy's blind. Nigel Vickery in 5th, trying to put away, and Bell at the inside of Waldron through the chicane. Now Ben Joseph looking on the exit. He's going to be on the outside with a hand hairpin. Now back on board with Rob Mortimer. Sylvain Vessier ahead up over the curb, challenging Steve Groves. Sarita Schoen in the mix as well. Likewise Chris Underhill. There's Chris Lord making the move on Stadden. Around Billy's blind go the leaders. Through the chicane, little bit of a gap between them. Now we're back on board with Paul Alexander. It's Ben Joseph ahead of us going to the inside of David Waldron. Now we're jumping on board with Waldron. Through goes Joseph and through goes Alexander. Paul Alexander not letting Ben Joseph go. And gets through the gap at the same time as Bell passes Vickery now. Up into the hand hairpin. This midfield chopping and changing all over this place. Now it's Sarita Schoen looking at the back of Steve Groves. Rob Mortimer, Chris Underhill and Robin Stoddart Stones in there as well. Likewise Phil Shears as they go up round Top Bend. still nearly 5 minutes plus a lap left on the clock, so plenty of time for things to happen as Dave Watts starts to put a little bit of a gap into Anthony Cleal. Now we're back on board with Joseph, and what a run out of the chicane against his fellow Welshman Nigel Vickery. Joseph makes that move. Now Sarita Schoen challenging Steve Groves on the outside, round the hand hairpin. Paul Alexander having a little look at Vickery into the horseshoe. Now there's Schoen looking to try and line up Steve Groves. As out of top bend we go, and down the straight once again, Sylvain Vessier now moving up onto the back of David Waldron. And he's going to be down the outside of Billy's Blind. Good move from Vessier. And Groves going to hold off Schoen. Rob Mortimer in there as well, under pressure from Chris Underhill. As through the chicane we go, as Robin Stone's right up in that group. Now we're on board with Ben Joseph. He's going to make the move past Adrian Helps. Now we're on board Alexander. Nigel Vickery ahead of us, getting a bit port play. Helps. Oh, and contact, and around goes Alexander. And he's off into the tyres, into the fence. That's Paul Alexander in the Magcroft. He's going to be plummeting down the order. As now we're on board with David Waldron. He's going to make the move on Helps. Going to try and follow Sylvain Vessier through. But Paul Alexander, they're just caught out in the wrong place at the wrong time, and he's going to plummet down to 18th already. But back on board with Mortimer, the race doesn't stop. Sarita Schoen ahead of us, looking at trying to pass Steve Groves. They go down into the hand hairpin once again. They're going past Adrian Helps as well. Mortimer through. Next up is Underhill, Stoddart Stones and Phil Shears. And that's a good sign. Paul Alexander's dug himself out the wall. He's going to be rejoining the race, it would seem, a lap down though. There he goes, refired, rejoining the racetrack. Just a quick wee to see if anything's not right, as through goes David Good and Ron Schoen, their nose to tail, battling over 18th spot, the two legends. Now back on board with Mortimer once again. Steve Groves ahead of us. Mortimer looks to the inside but thinks better of it. Sarita Schoen starting to put a little bit of a gap into them now. As round the horseshoe they go. There's Underhill, Robin Stoddart Stones, and Phil Shears is coming on the late race charge. As there is Good and Schoen, and there's the leaders coming up to put a lap on Paul Alexander. Now here's Nigel Vickery with Sylvain Vessier on his bumper. Vessier going to tuck inside on the way into the chicane, so through goes Sylvain Vessier. That's a move for 7th spot. David Waldron still in close proximity as Ron Schoen and David Good charge down towards Billy's Blind. Once again, Mortimer and Groves battling hard on the way into the hand hairpin. There's Chris Lord with Alex Kemp in tow as the leaders go through the chicane. And up the Sturmey Straight, Dave Watts has got a bit of daylight between himself and Anthony Cleal. But they are coming up on to put a lap on the back of the pack. Now back on board with Rob Mortimer. Steve Groves ahead of us, going around the kink. Mortimer moves to the inside. And Groves going to hang on around the outside, carrying the momentum into the chicane. Now back at the other end of the Sturmey Straight. There's Schoen, there's Groves, there's Mortimer. Chris Underhill and Robin Stoddart Stones battling away in behind. Phil Shears in there as well. Now round buttons goes the battle for 8. There's Schoen. And that's Ben Joseph. And that's no drive. Ben Joseph has a problem, and Ben Joseph is out. So the comp car pulling into the pit lane. Heartbreak for Joseph, up to 6th from 20th. But he is now out. But the race carries on as David Good now being overtaken by David Watts and Anthony Cleal. And that's going to give Cleal an opportunity to close back in. They go now down round Billy's Blind once again. Now back on board with Rob Mortimer. Still the Cosmic of Steve Groves in front of us. Round the horseshoe and through buttons they go. Chris Underhill, Robin Stoddart Stones and Phil Shears all on top of them as well now. Now there is Joey Foster in 3rd spot. Kieran Quirk's been holding true to him, and that's now we're on board with Steve Groves, and you can see his neck starting to go. As through goes Rob Mortimer in Billy's Blind. Groves struggling on. That is for 10th and 11th, as there's Chris Lord putting a move on Pete Stadden. That's Chris Underhill defending from Robin Stoddart Stones. Phil Shears in there, tucked up tight behind as well. Sarita Schoen behind Paul Alexander as the battle for 11th goes through buttons and up towards top bend. There goes Schoen making the pass on Alexander. But down the straight we go. Groves, Underhill, Phil Shears has moved ahead of Robin Stoddart Stones as they go down towards Billy's Blind. And Stoddart Stones retakes the place at Billy's Blind. So things chopping and changing, but here come the leaders. They've just taken the last lap board. Up in towards the chicane, back on board with Dave Watts. Making the move there on Pete Stadden. Down the Sturmy straight we go. And there's a view of what's behind us. Anthony Cleal, the man on the sticker. Now there's Paul Alexander letting the leaders go. And there's number 96, that's Pete Stadden making a position up against Paul Alexander on the last lap. Round buttons they go as Poots the Dune holds off Paul Alexander, but round the final corner to defend his O-plate for the third year in a row, Dave Watts crosses the line to take the win here at Clay Pigeon. Anthony Cleal right behind him, but there's plenty of racing still to go. And Steve Groves leads that train through the S's as down the Sturmy straight. Stoddart Stones on the outside, and here comes Shears at the inside on contact between Shears and Groves. Round goes Steve Groves. Phil Shears has gotten hooked up as well, so they're both going to drop to the back. Groves now going to point it back in the right direction, get on up the way. Chris Lord and Chris Underhill still nose to tail as well as they go round Pit Bend. Alex Kemp as well has made it through that without a scratch. There's Phil Shears. As here come the leaders into the pit lane there. Steve Groves going to get up past them in Top Bend. And Steve Groves is going to cross the line to round out our finishers here for Clay Pigeon. What a breathtaking race there for the Senior Blues. As the results will be confirmed, Dave Watts takes the win, the O-plate winning ahead of Anthony Cleal by 0.3 of a second at the line. Joey Foster in third ahead of Kieran Quirk and Mike Bell, with Sylvan Vessia, Nigel Vickery, David Waldron, Sarita Schoen and Rob Mortimer making up the top 10. Chris Underhill 11th ahead of Chris Lord. Alex Kemp, the novice, finishing 13th ahead of Robin Stoddart Stones, courtesy of a 5-second front fairing infringement. Phil Shears running out the top 15 ahead of Steve Groves, with David Good, Ron Schoen, Adrian Help and Pete Stadden making up the top 20. Paul Alexander, after his crash, will be 21st ahead of Ben Joseph and Tom Parker, with non-starts for Stuart Gray, Harry Smithson and John Hartshorn. What that'll do to the championship standings, Dave Watts is going to take the lead ahead of Stuart Gray on drop scores. Anthony Cleal in third ahead of Joey Foster and Kieran Quirk, ahead of Mike Bell, with a four-way tie between Nigel Vickery, Ben Joseph, Tom Parker and David Waldron, making up 7th to 10th. They're going to be ahead of Sylvan Vessia, Rob Mortimer, Sarita Schoen, Paul Alexander and Chris Underhill making up the top 15, with Steve Groves, David Good, Chris Lord, Robin Stoddart Stones and Phil Shears completing the top 20. In the Blue Masters standings, Anthony Cleal heads the table ahead of Stuart Gray on drop score, Joey Foster in strong third ahead of Vickery, Joseph and Waldron, Rob Mortimer 7th ahead of Paul Alexander, Chris Underhill and David Good, tied with Steve Groves for the top 10, ahead of Chris Lord, Robin Stoddart Stones, Phil Shears and Alex Kemp. Ron Schoen's in 16th ahead of John Hartshorn and Adrian Helps. And in the Blue Veteran standings, Anthony Cleal once again jumps to the top of the table ahead of Stuart Gray. Nigel Vickery and David Waldron tied for third and fourth ahead of Paul Alexander, Rob Mortimer, David Good, Chris Underhill, Phil Shears and Steve Groves. Obviously plenty of time left to go in the season, but the gap's already tiny. In the Blue Legend standings, Chris Underhill heads the way ahead of Stuart Gray, with Robin Stoddart Stones third ahead of David Good and Chris Lord, with Ron Schoen, John Hartshorn, Adrian Helps, Kevin O'Neill and Mark Cook making up the top 10 in the Legends class. And Rob Mortimer shoots to the top of the top weight standings ahead of Ben Joseph and Tom Parker, with Phil Shears, Ron Schoen, John Hartshorn, Adrian Helps, Mark Cook and Billy Thomas completing the class. And in the Tabor Customer Prize Fund, we have a tie in the lead with Anthony Cleal and Joey Foster even on 58 points. They're going to be ahead of Mike Bell, Rob Mortimer and the top junior Sam Mitchell up in 5th. That's all for today at Clay Pigeon. Join us again for round 3 of the Blue Challenge coming to you from Mansell Raceway in a few weeks. Until then, goodbye.
Oh shit! That's a lot of extra reading.